So 9:40 in the morning, Gulf of Oman. A crude tanker, 280 meters of steel and oil, cuts its automatic identification system transponder, pushes to full speed. No flag, no beacon, no trail on any commercial tracking screen anywhere in the world. From the bridge, the captain runs his numbers one more time. The nearest US Navy destroyer is sitting inside the strait, 25 miles of radar horizon around it. Hard physics, nothing to be done about it. The tanker is already 38 miles out and pulling away. The math says he's invisible. The math is catastrophically wrong. This is a hypothetical scenario built from real systems and documented capabilities for education and entertainment. But every piece of technology in this breakdown is real, operational, and in the water right now. Here's what the captain didn't account for. A radar that doesn't sit on a ship at all. A radar that doesn't care about the curve of the Earth. A radar that was already watching him from the moment he left port. Bouncing signals off the sky itself, painting his hull on a screen 400 miles away, and quietly cooing a P-8A Poseidon to his position before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. By the time he realizes he's been seen, there is nowhere left to go. Let's set the board. CENTCOM has been running a naval blockade enforcement operation in the Gulf of Oman and the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz for the better part of 3 weeks. 10 vessels have already been turned back. Cargo ships, a chemical tanker, 2 vessels running with falsified manifests. The pressure is economic and it's working. The Iranian port network feeding crude to buyers willing to absorb the sanctions risk has been throttled, down to a trickle. But a blockade only works if it's complete. One tanker getting through with a full cargo, roughly 2 million barrels, is enough to dent the math, signal buyers that the corridor is still open, and buy the smuggling network weeks of credibility. This run matters. The people organizing it know that. They've planned for it. The tanker spent 48 hours at anchor outside normal shipping lanes, waiting for a window. The window they chose. Pre-dawn darkness, no moon. A gap between P8 patrol cycles they calculated from commercial flight tracking data. AIS Dark from the moment engines went to full ahead. Speed, 14 knots, pushing the hull hard. Course, a wide arc away from the main strait, angling southeast across the Gulf of Oman toward a coastal track where friendly receivers could guide them into port. From a pure geometry standpoint, the plan is not stupid. Here's the physics the captain is banking on. A ship's radar, even the AN/SY-6 air and missile defense radar on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, one of the most capable shipborne sensors ever built, is a line-of-sight system. Radio waves at the frequencies those radars use travel in straight lines. The Earth curves. At sea level, a radar antenna mounted 30 meters above the waterline has a geometric horizon of roughly 25 nautical miles to a target the size of a tanker. Beyond that, the target is hull down, physically below the radar horizon, hidden by the planet itself. Think of it like standing on a beach with a flashlight. No matter how powerful the light, you cannot illuminate something on the other side of a hill. The Earth's curvature is that hill. At 38 miles, the tanker's hull is below the geometric horizon of every warship in the area. On their screens, the context simply doesn't exist. The captain has done his homework. What he hasn't done is account for the system that rewrote those rules decades ago. Over-the-horizon radar, OT concept. The United States has a rated stick skywave OTH radar system since the Cold War, and the physics behind them is elegant enough that once you understand it, you wonder why it took anyone this long to exploit it fully. Here's how it works. Standard radar uses frequencies in the gigahertz range, microwaves, essentially, because high frequency means high resolution and tight beams. But those frequencies punch straight through the ionosphere and out into space. They don't bounce. OTH radar flips the equation entirely. It operates in the high-frequency band, roughly 5 to 30 megahertz, low enough that the ionosphere, that electrified shell of atmosphere between 60 and 1,000 kilometers above the Earth, acts as a mirror. The radar transmits a massive HF pulse skyward at an angle. The ionosphere reflects it back down, past the horizon, onto the sea surface hundreds of miles away. Any ship sitting in that patch of sea reflects energy back up, the ionosphere bounces it back to the receiver, and the system processes the return. The analogy that makes this click. Imagine you're trying to see around a corner. You can't look directly, the wall is in the way. But if you bounce a ball off the ceiling at the right angle, it travels around that corner and comes back to you. That's exactly what OTH radar does, but with radio energy and a ceiling made of ionized particles 200 kilometers overhead. The detection range isn't limited by the horizon. It's limited by the radar's power and the ionospheric conditions of the day. Operational OTH systems can reliably detect ship-sized targets at ranges between 500 and 3,000 kilometers. At 0914 this morning, the contact bearing the tanker's radar cross-section showed up clean at approximately 400 nautical miles from the receiving station, well inside the system's comfortable operating envelope. What's most surprising about this intercept isn't the detection range. It's how early the cue arrived. The tanker was still in its departure phase, engines not yet at full power, still inside waters where commercial traffic provides cover. When the OTH returned first painted, the system didn't catch a runaway. It caught a departure. Here's the second layer of the trap, and this one is the captain's own mistake. He cut his AIS to hide. In maritime practice, this is the equivalent of a driver turning off their headlights to avoid being noticed. Every other vehicle on the road has headlights on. You become the only dark object in a lit environment. You don't disappear, you stand out. The automatic identification system is mandatory for vessels above a certain tonnage under international maritime law. Every legitimate tanker, every cargo ship, every vessel with a reason to be in these waters is broadcasting its identity, position, speed, and course on a standardized VHF frequency every few seconds. The entire Gulf of Oman is a dense web of AIS signals, continuously tracked by satellites, shore stations, and every warship in the region. When you go AIS dark in that environment, you don't vanish from the picture. You create a hole in the picture. Maritime patrol systems flag dark contacts automatically, a gap where traffic. Patterns suggest a vessel should be transmitting but isn't. That flag goes to analysts, who cross-reference it with other sensor feeds, commercial satellite imagery, recent port departure records. Going silent doesn't erase you from the kill chain. It puts your name at the top of it. Here's the unpopular take, and we'll say it plainly. The AIS Dark tactic that Shadow Fleet operators treat as their primary concealment method is now, operationally, more of a targeting aid than a countermeasure. Every intelligence system monitoring this waterway treats a dark contact as probability hostile until proven otherwise. The captain thought he was pulling a curtain closed. He was painting himself red. So by 0920, CENTCOM Maritime Operations Center has two independent indicators converging on a single contact. The OTH radar return, processed and geolocated to a 10-kilometer uncertainty ellipse, and the AIS gap, a dark hole in the traffic pattern at exactly the position, heading, and speed consistent with a vessel that departed a known anchorage 3 hours ago on a profile matching previous blockade running attempts. A P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft already airborne on its Shield patrol track receives a queue update. New tasking: investigate the dark contact. The P-8 doesn't need to search. It has a grid square and a vector. Put yourself in the position of a watchstander in that operations center for a moment. You're looking at a display with hundreds of AIS contacts moving normally across the Gulf. And then there's one absence, a shaped silence. A shadow moving through the traffic at 14 knots toward a coast where it has no business being. The OTH return confirms the hull. The AIS gap confirms the intent. The intercept geometry is already calculated before anyone picks up a radio. The tanker's captain, at this moment, believes he is invisible. He has no radar warning receiver that detects H-Chef skywave. The frequencies are too low, the pulse too diffuse, the system architecture too different from anything his electronic support measures were built to catch. He has received no active illumination. No one has pinged him with fire control radar. Nothing on his bridge is alarmed. He is being watched from 400 miles away by a system he cannot see, detect, or evade, and he doesn't know it yet. The P-8A Poseidon closes at 490 knots, from the OTHQ to visual contact, less than 45 minutes. The Poseidon is not a subtle aircraft. 130,000 pounds of 737 derivative packed with A-10 surface search radar, acoustic processing systems, electro-optical sensors, and enough communications equipment to run a small naval battle. Subtlety isn't the point here. The surface search radar paints the contact at 60 miles, clean return, large vessel, consistent with a crude tanker in the 250-meter class, no AIS. Moving at 14 knots on a heading that takes it precisely toward the coastal approach they flagged 3 weeks ago, when the first dark tanker tried this route. At 40 miles, the Poseidon descends. The electro-optical system locks. On the sensor operator's screen, the tanker sharpens into detail. Rust streaks on the hull, a repainted name on the stern that doesn't match the last registration photo on file, a national flag that was swapped out sometime in the last 48 hours. The documentation fraud is visible from 40 miles in the air before anyone has said a word on the radio. The Poseidon makes a single orbit overhead. No weapons deployed, no warning shots. The aircraft's mere presence is the message. Here's what this moment looks like from the bridge of the tanker. First indication. The ship's navigation radar picks up an aircraft at close range, low altitude, circling. Then the radio crackles on the international distress frequency, channel 16. A calm, flat American voice identifies the aircraft, identifies the vessel by its hull configuration, not its name, because it has no valid name right now, and requests the master come to the bridge for a boarding inspection. The captain has three options. Run, which at 14 knots against an aircraft doing 490 is not running. Resist, which would require weapons he doesn't have and would result in a response he very much wants to avoid. Or comply. He cuts the engines to 5 knots. An MH-60R Seahawk launched from the USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer that repositioned during the intercept, reaches the tanker 22 minutes later. The boarding team is professional, unhurried, thorough. They photograph everything. The cargo manifests, the navigation logs showing the deliberate course away from shipping lanes, the AIS control panel with the transponder manually disabled, the sat phone with call records to shore contacts and ports under sanction. No shot fired, no injury. The tanker is diverted under escort to a port where the cargo, the vessel, and its documentation will become somebody's legal problem for the next several months. 10 ships turned back by force of presence. 11 now turned back by a radar that sees through the horizon itself. One detail that sticks. The entire detection sequence, from OTH returned to boarding team on deck, ran in under 3 hours. The captain spent 48 hours planning and waiting for his window. He had approximately 0 minutes of it actually open. Here's what this tells us about the current state of maritime concealment. The Shadow Fleet model, misregistered vessels, flag hopping, AIS manipulation, timing gaps between patrol cycles, was developed when the primary detection threat was shipborne radar with a 25-mile horizon, patrol aircraft that had to be physically dispatched to a search area. Both of those constraints are gone. OTH radar removes the horizon constraint entirely. Satellite AIS monitoring removes the gap in coverage constraint. The combination means a dark contact in a monitored waterway is not hidden. It is flagged, tracked, and queued before it has completed its first hour underway. The Blockade running playbook hasn't caught up to the sensor environment it's operating in. That gap is not the tanker captain's fault. He was working with the Doctrine he was given. The Doctrine is simply obsolete. Before you go, one thing about over-the-horizon radar that almost nobody mentions when they cover this technology. The ionosphere is not a fixed mirror. It moves, flexes, and changes density with the time of day, solar activity, and season. OTH radar systems don't just transmit and receive, they continuously probe the ionosphere with diagnostic pulses, map its current state, and adjust their operating frequency in real time to maintain the reflection angle they need. The system is, in effect, navigating the ceiling of the atmosphere on the fly, hunting for the frequency that will bounce cleanly off tonight's ionosphere at tonight's geometry. That means OTH performance isn't constant. There are windows, solar events, ionospheric disturbances where coverage degrades. The Blockade running community knows this. The next attempt almost certainly won't be timed around a patrol cycle. It will be timed around a solar forecast. At sea, you can't outrun the horizon, but a radar that bounces off the sky already erased it. The question is whether the next captain figures out what the sky looks like on the day he runs. Is there a window in the ionosphere big enough to slip through? Comment yes or no. We read everyone. If this breakdown hit different, the channel has more in this series. The next one goes into what happens when an RGC-fast boat swarm actually reaches the destroyer it was hunting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you think the Shadow Fleet needs a better playbook, or think CENTCOM is overplaying its hand in the Gulf, put your take in the comments. The real debate is always down there.